Hi, I'm Ed Mullins. Welcome back to Maki and Mullins with more to the story with Inside Blue 360. Welcome back again. We covered a lot of ground regarding the COVID virus, and a couple of things that Maki and I have been talking about is the impact to law enforcement after this has all been settled, and we can really look at these stay-at-home orders that have been issued. We talked about how the mayor is implementing policies of enforcement. He did it, with the Civic funeral in Brooklyn. He's getting a little bit more brazen in the sense that they want law enforcement to enforce social distancing policies. Policies are different than laws. How do we see the impact of law enforcement trying to implement these policies in the communities? And in some communities, they just don't want to listen. And think about it, we're 6 weeks maybe into this virus. People want to be out. The weather's getting better. Mayor's claiming beaches are going to be closed. Sporting events are done. I just don't see the American public locking themselves indoors all summer.
First of all, we are not Chinese. We are not disciplined like they are. And I say it because, I visited China a number of times, and their compliance with law enforcement is nowhere near of any other country on earth in terms of compliance. People comply based on how legitimate they think the police force is in terms of what they tell them to do or not to do. As you mentioned, policy is not the law. You have a policy, good, but I am going to violate the policy and take it upon myself. Just walking to the studio the other day, half of the people in Manhattan don't wear masks, even though they're supposed to. Do you expect NYPD officers to walk to them and say, wear your mask? And I will tell them, I don't want to wear my mask. And what are you going to do, right? You don't want to lose the legitimacy that you have right now. And you will lose it on the spot if people will not comply and see that there are no consequences. Right? 35,000 cops, 36,000 cops in a city of 10 million people. How are you going to enforce it? So somebody has to think about issuing these policies and then turning to law enforcement and telling the commissioner or another chief of police in any other jurisdiction, enforce this policy now. How I'm going to do it without losing my face, so to speak. Not just my face as a commissioner or chief, but losing the face of the department.
So what would you say to Mayor de Blasio, who is trying finally to do something, although it's probably the wrong thing once again, to take a position of enforcement? He's taken his position. Law enforcement is going to go out, we're going to issue summonses and take enforcement policies. Now, I personally think that that's the wrong answer, even though we're trying to keep people safe. What would you say to him, what he should do?
I would say to Mayor de Blasio, don't add to NYPD's function another function that is not enforceable.
Good advice. Good advice.
Cannot, realistically speaking, go on television or any other media outlet and say, not going to allow this to happen. That's nice. That's a statement.
Boogeyman in the closet.
That's a statement. Yeah. How are you going to implement this statement, this threatening statement? We always say, don't threaten if you cannot back it up. If you cannot back it up, people will know immediately that you cannot back it up. And then they will extrapolate from this to everything else that you're going to tell them. Do. So if you want to destroy any credibility that NYPD has, or any police force for that matter, with the public, and some communities, they don't have credibility, and there is no compliance, even prior to the virus, right? But there are many communities when there is credibility and there is compliance. If you want to completely destroy police profession the way it was, go ahead and tell the cops to enforce policies that are not enforceable.
Knowing him, he'll do it. It's
He'll do it because nobody's thinking about policing as a profession, and I do.
It's a common sense approach of what you're describing. I don't encourage police officers to go out and start locking people up for congregating on a sidewalk or a mask. You're really bordering on violating rights. And yes, if you're ordered, but you better make sure you're passing that up to the next person who's ordering you, because you're in some murky waters by doing it. And for the mayor to come out and push that is really putting us at odds with the community. And I just don't see anything good coming from it. I just don't. If people need to be able to protect themselves. If you can't swim, you tell them don't go in the ocean. Well, I'm telling you, wear a mask, keep your distance, you're going to get sick.
Listen, it's always like this. There are things that we tell people not to do, but at the end of the day, if they want to do it, you cannot stop
You can't stop them.
You cannot stop them in a democratic society, and the emphasis has to be in a democratic society, because one of the biggest threats of crises of that magnitude is the damage it does to the idea of democracy, right? Of people.
In the long run, sure, has an impact. Right.
In the long run. So yes, people die and it's horrible, but at the same time, you don't want to lose everything that was created over the past few hundred years.
Right.
And if you start throwing out the empty threats and take police organizations, that is such an important part of any democratic society, an effective and respected police organization, and you want to
destroy it.
Maki,
China has been cited as the cause for the virus. In the city of Wuhan, this is where it was created. It's man-made from what we're hearing. Some people say it's an accident. Some people say it's manufactured and was done on purpose. At the end of the day, whatever the real facts are, I haven't been privy to. But what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing is that this will create an issue for law enforcement in the Asian community, and maybe some bias to some extent. We have Asian American officers that are in the NYPD. They're part of our NYPD, and do you foresee them as being put in conflict with this whole possibly anti-China type movement that may come? We hear about the manufacturing and pharmaceuticals and the safety equipment all being manufactured in China. What do you foresee, and what do you think we should do?
Well, this goes back again to the history. What happened during World War II? All the Japanese Americans suddenly, in camps in the United States of America. And fast forward to 2020, I don't think it will ever happen again, but you cannot stop people from thinking what they're thinking. And there are a number of problems here. And actually, this was brought to my attention by one of the NYPD students, who is an NYPD student of Asian background. But he said to me, people don't differentiate. They don't know if I'm from Hong Kong, from China, from Korea, born here, from the Philippines. They all said Asians. We all look the same. So anybody who is less educated or harbors prejudice to begin with, this is a very fertile ground. And we had a number of incidents already,
sure.
like people shouting at people who
In the
look
streets,
Asian
yeah.
to them on the streets, go back to China, whatever. So it's one thing to scream, go back to China. It's another start, dousing people with some chemicals, which also happened, I don't know if New York or someplace it happened, around the country. Historically, we know that there will be a wave. How serious this wave will be, I don't know. But large cities like New York, when you have the Chinatown, when you have large communities of communities of people who are actually from China, so it's not a case of mistaken identity. People will go to Chinatown. And the mob mentality is something that we see raising always during crisis, right? The mob mentality. When things go wrong, whether economically or...
we saw it after 9/11, it was the Muslim...
Anti-Muslim sentiments. Sure. So there are two problems for law enforcement here. First of all, the problems for people who are of Asian background, Chinese background, who are on the job, whether or not they're going to experience some intra-agency biases, which is also possible.
Good
right?
point.
It's possible, so you have to think about this,
right.
And police organizations have to make sure that their own employees, because it always, to me, boils down to first take care of your employees, make sure that your cops are protected, that they don't get any backlash from the colleagues, yeah, and then take it to the streets in terms of, making sure that these crimes, which are real crimes, these are the crimes that NYPD has to enforce. They have to make sure that anybody who engages in these behaviors is arrested, is processed immediately, this type of violations and crimes have to take, priority in police organizations,
Should
not
we be
arresting people for standing on the corner.
creating more awareness of this now? Because, the virus situation is still going on. Investigations are going on. But maybe we should be preparing people ahead of time to open their minds and to not label and...
Absolutely. There is already some intel about various extremist groups in the country that are using the virus to blame various minorities. Not necessarily Chinese, they're blaming it,
Right, whatever hate group they want.
Yeah,
sure.
they hate, but it's another aspect that we have to look at. That we do have, according to Southern Poverty Law Center, they trace the hate groups around the country. We have over 1,000 hate groups in this country. And they hate everybody and their mother. So nobody is safe here. And they're using times like this to promulgate their hatred, to blame this, to say, this group, these people, they immigrants or whatever, they brought this on United States. And unfortunately, 1,000 tracked hate groups, many of them in that tri-state area, in New York, in New Jersey, Connecticut. We tend to think about the skinheads and the, various KKK outfits somewhere
else.
Far away.
Right.
They're here. They're here. Hundreds of hate groups in the tri-state area. We have to be thinking what they are thinking. It's always something that, I try to teach the cops steps ahead, not one step ahead, steps ahead in terms of what could happen because there was a disaster like this. Prepare yourself. Make sure that you know. For example, all these groups, I had one NYPD student, he was doing a paper for me. He discovered his neighbor in his backyard was a member of a hate group.
Wow.
His neighbor, next door neighbor, said, I never received any training from NYPD about these hate groups that operate in the neighborhood. These are things that we have to start looking at. It's not just the Chinese, it's various extremists that will use this as a sort of mobilizing force multiplier in a way to promulgate the hate.
It's probably a good time to take all of this, to learn from it, to, look in a variety of different groups and, foresee problems that may be coming in the future simply because it's presenting itself now.
Because all these hate groups, and I call them terrorist groups because to me there's no difference, because what is a terrorist group? They're the same, it's a hate group, yeah? So all these groups are looking for some mobilizing factor. So if some terrorist, head of some terrorist organization is killed in Afghanistan, they take this as a sign to do something in New York. They don't have to look that far right now. Things are happening here in this country. Here is the mobilizing factor for them to.
We're going to have a lot of different things happening right now.
Different type of
our food supply chains. Hormel, they're starting to have numerous employees out sick with the virus. They're shutting down the manufacturing facilities. There'll be spillovers. I mean, who would think that toilet paper was a big issue for a country?
Yeah.
And I can only imagine what happens if we run out of chicken or beef or one of those things.
Absolutely.
So I would think that's got to impact us also. It's going to create more crime.
People, it's not necessarily more crime, but different type of crime. Different type of crime.
Correct,
and this is very important for law enforcement. Law enforcement organizations in general are not necessarily learning organizations, so it takes them primarily reactive in nature. Something happens, react. It's very hard. Although for decades now everybody's talking about proactive policing versus reactive policing, but it still remains in the sphere of rhetorics, the proactive policing. It's more reaction. But this is the time to be very proactive about new types of criminality. And there's, again, places to learn from. What happened in countries during wars when the food supply is dwindling? People start, looting stores. Or there is some sort of a rumor that, with the toilet paper, no more meat or no more chicken, and suddenly people start breaking into supermarkets or fights in the supermarkets. I have a piece of chicken. No, give me this is my piece of chicken.
Sure, yeah.
Unfortunately, during times of crisis, one would hope that only the best side of you will come out. But it's actually the time that the worst side come out.
In times of crisis, you would like to think that, but that takes me into, the other topic of what's coming out is a movement without prisons.
No.
We're releasing people. There are large groups out there that believe in a world without prisons. So as we're talking about different types of crimes occurring, we also have people that believe that this pandemic has created a situation where we don't need to keep people incarcerated behind walls of prisons.
And this is very similar to how political environments work, that people with no knowledge and no competence get jobs. Similar here, people who believe that this world can be prisonless or without prisons. In the most progressive country on earth, like in terms of how they treat their prisoners, like Norway or Sweden, where the prisons are, like 5-star hotels in comparison to the way we house people in the United States, they still have prisons. So there is no country on earth that doesn't have a prison. So it's not a movement that you're talking about that is well informed about why we have prisons and how we need to respond to crime. Not having prisons means no consequences for the crimes that you commit. And people might say, no, there are other consequences, other alternatives. For certain crimes, yes. Maybe if you swindle somebody of, $200 or $2,000, maybe there are other ways to make you pay for it. Maybe I'll put you, as a seasonal worker here with the blueberries,
right. Violent crime.
Violent crime.
Right.
People who rape, who kill, who break into houses, who break into businesses just because they can. What kind of alternative are you looking at? What kind of alternative you would like to have? Child molesters, People are saying now that the sex offenders have a ball now because there's no strict enforcement in various areas. So
well, it's a behavioral crime and it doesn't change. So we're looking at bail reform that's let everybody out. We're putting sex offenders, murderers, violent criminals back to the street. And we just saw recently an individual released and goes out and commits a rape. So, I agree with you in the sense that other countries have almost 5-star prisons, and they still have them. I think our culture is the kind of strange in a sense that people think we can do this without any kind of incarceration. And
again, a lot of people take into the different definitions. I heard somebody calling, pedophilia, for example, a sexual preference. And again, as long as you have an opinion about this, you can have an opinion about this. But we're still a country of laws. And there are laws here that are violated for which there are certain punishments. And as long as these punishments are there, we will need prisons. And it's not about how you define various crimes as an individual. It's how the society views these crimes.
People actually believe pedophilia is a sexual preference.
People believe, again, and I think I mentioned before that in general, sex crimes can be treated differently. Sex criminals can be treated differently than through incarceration. And again,
to be clear, I mean, you're a sick individual if you're attacking children.
Of course.
That's not a preference.
No, that's absolutely not a preference.
Honestly,
but people who talk like this go back to the Roman Empire, right? When they had all this.
How'd that work out for you? Roman Empire collapsed.
Exactly. This is exactly my response. The Roman Empire collapsed and the Greeks collapsed. They also had various preferences there, and they're no longer with us. All these great, creators of concepts of democracy. At the same time, they were not smart enough to secure their democracies. And one of the pillars of democracy to me is effective law enforcement, which will include prisons.
Right.
People do need to know that there are consequences. Even myself, I say sometimes if there were no consequences, maybe I would engage in some violent behaviors. Sometimes I guess the old cop comes through and says sometimes just brute force is the answer.
It's that thin blue line between good and evil.
Brute force is the answer to some things. But I'm saying, no, I won't do well in prison. You know, I don't want to go to prison.
No one wants to lose their freedom, although there are people who just don't care. That's what
People
happens.
don't care. That's okay. That's a preference, but they don't not to care. But from my perspective, as a law-abiding citizen, I need to know that somebody who commits a crime, a serious crime, and to me, serious crimes are a crime of physical nature, but also destroying people's homes and then businesses. So it's not just hurting people physically, but also hurting their property. These people need to be separated from the society
And
for
rightfully
a certain
so.
period of time.
And the people who support the opposite really need to go get their heads examined, because we're seeing criminals being released, and I get maybe wrongful prosecutions, things like that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this feeling that we need to, change thinking. And the thinking is turning society, the streets that we're all living in, we're turning that into prisons. We're turning that into the arena of fear, where you can't let your kids play, you can't let your children, walk the streets or go to work or come into an apartment building late at night, because the individual that should be incarcerated behind bars is now waiting for you in your hallway coming into the building. That just cannot happen. And people need to be held accountable who let that happen.
I mean, accountability is a word that
Seems no one wants to live with.
Yeah, but to me it's synonymous with a democratic and modern society. Accountability, because this is exactly what we're all about. You do something, there are consequences. You have to live with the consequences.
Right.
If not,
there's got to be consequences. No one goes to work without expecting to be paid.
and again, I want to hear these people who talk about prisoners' world. What are the alternatives? What are the alternatives? What are you going to do with a pedophile? Huh? What are you going to do with them? What are you going to do with a rapist? What are you going to do with a serial killer?
Well, they believe in rehabilitation. That's a lot of these people believe in. Give them a chance. You're going to get a bicycle as a
Okay,
kid.
how many chances you give them? Now, let's say hypothetically, I agree with you. Let's give you a chance. You raped one woman or one man. Okay, you raped another one. How many chances, right? Okay, and let's say I gave you 10 chances, and here you raped 11th person. What do I do with you now? Can I put you in prison now?
Well, my world, one is too many.
Mine too, but I'm saying that's my answer to the movements. Let's say hypothetically that everybody deserves second, third, 14th, 15th chance, even though probably you would speak differently if it was your family member who was the victim or you yourself. But the case of the student who was murdered in the park by the teenagers.
Columbia student, yeah.
Columbia student, right? If you talk to her parents, how many chances you think
she didn't get a second chance?
They would want to give to these teenagers to be out there right now and not in some sort of juvenile facility or prison for that matter? How many chances? How many other students would you allow them to rob and stab?
See, that's the missing point to all of this, is that we talk about someone, he's committed 3 crimes. He was caught for 3 crimes.
Absolutely.
He might have committed 100, but we only
Absolutely.
caught him 3 times.
Absolutely.
And that's the part of the equation that always gets left out. And that is something that none of the elected officials ever talk about. They just totally forget that.
Because we live in very liberal times, and again, nothing against this, but it has to be liberal and sensible, right? It has to have some backdrop of common sense. So it sounds it's a great agenda, prisonless world, or prisoner city, or prisoner sanctuary city. We talked about this before, sanctuary city. It sounds great, and the people like to hear these things because they're so.
They like to hear it until that individual is standing in their apartment, in the middle of the night, ready to steal from them or hurt an individual in their family. Then they have a problem with it, and that's what no one really wants to talk about. We're not telling the truth on what occurs, and this whole sanctuary city issue is not about people who are here trying to make a living. It's about taking criminals who are known criminals, convicted of crimes, and returning them back to where they come from. And the dialogue's been changed.
I always believe in visuals because I'm more of a visual person. I hear things, I might be thinking about something, but if I see things, I see things. I would like the NYPD or another police department not just talk about how many murders were in the city, but show the pictures. As they're talking, there are 300 murders. Here are the pictures.
No one places
of the
face.
victims.
These are the people.
And not just the face, how they were killed, how they were brutalized.
And what was their life about?
And
you
and
got to
who-
humanize
who
it.
do-
We
who
don't
do-
do
who
that.
did they leave? I don't want the picture of the perp. I don't care how he or she looks. I want the pictures of the victims. That's what I want to see. I don't want to see, and I'm not going to mention their names because I do it purposefully, because I don't want to glorify murderers, the Boston Marathon terrorists, the killers. Their pictures, they humanize them. Their pictures were all over the media of the boys, the Chechens. To me, I don't want to know their names.
Yeah, we shouldn't
I
really
don't
know who
want
they
to
are. We
see.
should just know this is what they did and this is what's going to
That's
happen
it.
to them.
Show me the people who lost their legs, who lost their arms, who lost their lives, their pictures. So maybe then people will start thinking
Place more
differently
value on
about prisoners. You want to release this person who did this, and not once and not twice and not 3 times, and because people tend to think our prisons are just filled with wrongly convicted
Well,
individuals.
look, the world is currently changed. It changed after 9/11. There's not a child today that's going to board a flight that doesn't get searched. Not like when I was a kid. So there's changes there. The waits at airports, I mean, we've adapted to that. There's going to be changes when this pandemic passes. The question now is, what are the changes? I mean, we see people wearing masks everywhere we go. There's the elbow bump, the fist bump. I don't know how restaurants are going to operate. How does it change law enforcement? I mean,
I know how it should change law enforcement. Nobody wants to
well,
listen
then let's
to
hear
me.
it.
Again, I spoke about this for many years, but maybe now it's my time. Training has to change in a transformational way, not transactional, transformational. Give me your training manuals and give me a big fireplace, and I'm going to throw all this training
You get the
manuals
vote of every cop in the city of New York
into
to throw
this
those
big
manuals.
fireplace, and not just in the city, around the country. Okay, give me your records for recruitment and selection, and I will sort of eliminate half of the people who are there. I would eliminate everybody who had criminal conviction or was arrested for any type of criminal behavior, and we talked about this. I'm sorry, that's not the people who I want to see in law enforcement. Let me increase the age for recruitment, not recruiting anybody under the age of 25. I need to deal with grown-ups, not with people who are still developing emotionally and psychologically. I need to impart the new training on individuals who are fully wired for
You think
this.
training, what you're talking about is changing culture of policing. And you're talking about a whole new breed of person that if you picked up at the age of 20, I came out at the age of 20, but I was trained by people who were Vietnam vets, and I got a lot of experience from them. And I was also born and raised in this city. So,
But you also might have been a more mature individual.
Maybe.
The same people don't have the same growth, right, and weight. So some people at the age of 20 are fully matured, but other people are not. So I don't want to take this chance, right? I don't want to take this chance. I don't want to take the chance of recruiting somebody who is emotionally
do you
not
think
ready.
that we take individuals, we take people who want to be cops, we raise the age limits, we give them high quality training, and we pay them for their value? Do you get a better police officer?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because you get a true professional, somebody who, what is a true professional in my mind in policing? Somebody who is ready for this. Right? In leadership, there's this formulas, willing and ready, not willing but ready, ready but not willing, And I always say you have to be a good police officer, you have to be ready and willing, not just willing. So no doubt in my mind that many cops are willing to become
But
cops,
they're not ready.
but they're not ready.
Right.
But not everybody can be a pilot, not everybody can be a doctor, not everybody can be a teacher, not everybody can be a cop. In order to understand who can be a cop, you have to create standards that go beyond how many push-ups you can do in a minute, and how you answer your
Have
psychological
any of these
tests.
suggestions been adopted by any department that you're aware of in the world?
Oh, in the world for sure, because
25,
Well,
willing,
not
ready.
so much, not so much 25, but in the countries where they have police universities that last for 4 years, like Norway, for example, right? Or Finland. So when you start at the age of 18, you graduate at the age of 22 after 4 years. So you're already a few years older than
And you've been
others.
getting a 4-year
degree
law enforcement degree in
that
police.
at the police university that involves both practical and theoretical training. So they study, but then they are deployed to precincts.
Why do we not do that here?
Because we have the most decentralized, crazy system in the United States with 18,000 different departments. As we talked before, we have 600 departments in New York State. Who needs 600 departments in New York State? Move from NYPD to some department upstate New York that has 3 cops. I trained the chief of this department. I had a leadership training in Albany for police chiefs from New York State. I have chiefs there that had 2, 3, 5 cops. I said, are you kidding me? You an independent department? Yes, an independent department. It's nonsense. How can you afford to send somebody to a police university when you have cops you have 3 cops who you're going to send to the university. Centralize the police forces, have 1 per state. I'm not saying 1 for the country, 1 per state. Take all the 600, bring them together, bring the resources together, pay for the university. John Jay College is a perfect vehicle to become a university for police officers in New York State. And in each and every state, there is a university that has already a well-developed criminal justice department that can transition into this. Start doing this. I mean,
it's interesting to see what the differences are between the places that do it and those that don't.
Of course, listen, NYPD is much more progressive because at least it requires associate degree, right? I mean, most of the departments...
And that wasn't well received when that was implemented. That was fought in the beginning.
Okay,
Chief Scott, who didn't have a degree, is the guy that implemented it.
Yeah, but most of the departments in the United States, high school diploma or GED, that's unacceptable. But again, going back to what needs to be done, these are the 3 things for me. Recruit people, based on age. Select people based on lack of criminal record, level of maturity that can be established through different types of psychological tests, looking at their work history, I mean, why somebody who worked, let's say, and I'm not going to mention the specific chain, but somebody who worked, let's say, for some sort of a deli becomes a police officer. I mean, to me, policing is a career that you should be striving for as your first job. How do you, and people say, well, there were no openings, and they say, okay, I can factor for this that there were no job openings.
It's true. When you think about, we're giving you a 20-plus year career. To carry a firearm, you're required to know all kinds of medical aid and dealing with all these different things. We put you through an academy for a couple of months, and we see you in the future.
Yeah, see you in the future. And the only in-service training will be punitive in nature because it will come after some scandal, right?
That's always what happens.
That's always what happens, and millions of dollars spent on this.
Right, and you didn't get what you should have gotten.
This is the time. This is the time to take a good look at your academy, whether it's NYPD or any other state, regional, or city in-house academy. Say, do I have the guts? And again, it will have to have the blessing of the mayor, respective mayors.
You gotta want a mayor who wants to do it, sure.
Throw it all out, including the recruitment selection, package it differently, have less cops if needed, in terms of
having money. Less cops may produce a better cop.
Absolutely. If the money is an issue, if at the end of this equation, when you will eliminate the current training and identify the modules for the future training, you will come out with a number that is a bit too high. Recruit less cops, but better cops. Better cops. And again, at any given situation, they are now outnumbered as is. So does it matter if you have 1 cop for 200 or 300
I wonder what the
or
cops
400?
think of a state university, your 4-year degree, you're 18 years old, you go through it, and then you graduate and get placed somewhere in law enforcement, as you would normally. Send that in. Let us know what you think.
Listen, I know that all my students, and over the years, because we started the program that I ran in 2001, so it's 19 years. They love it, and they come on their own time. It's paid for. We have grants from the city council, but they come on their own time, and nobody forces them. So there are thousands of cops out there that value the education that's not punitive. That's not punitive
almost
in
every
nature.
cop I talk to wants more and
Not
more training.
punitive in
Almost
nature.
everybody wants
Yeah.
it. They just don't get what we need, and they don't get the training. There may be certain training that goes to certain individuals, and everybody wants it. And they don't.
You know, years ago, under Commissioner Bratton, when he came second time around, and
Right, 2.0, I call it.
Bratton 2.0, yes, because there was some leadership development also 2.0 something. I talked to one of his people who told me that he's in charge of hiring the civilian deputy commissioners for Bratton. I said to him, I have an idea for you. Why don't you create a position, deputy commissioner for professional integrity? And he says to me, oh, we have internal affairs. I said, I'm not talking about internal affairs at all. He says, what are you talking about? I'm talking about creating a position and staffing it with a person who knows what he or she is doing to make sure what the cops need on this job. Whether it's how their prisons look, how their place of employment look, because you know better than I how certain prisons look, right?
Right.
And I was flabbergasted by looking at certain prisons
disgusting.
because it looked to me like I visited police departments all over the world. I have not seen.
Ours are the worst.
I have not seen anything like this. Filthy, you know, health hazards. Talking about viruses, cops were exposed to health hazards long before Corona. I mean, in the prisons.
The prisons,
in the prisons.
they're terrible.
Make sure what your employee wants. Place of employment, that they can go to the bathroom. I went to one of the prisons, can I use the bathroom? They told me, no, you better not. I mean, have a clean desk, no Chinese food from 3 weeks ago underneath the table, you know, or Greek food or whatever.
The prisons are horrific.
Horrific.
If the public knew what
horrific.
the cops were working in, they would be flabbergasted as well.
And this is part of professional integrity, making sure that your employees are taken care of, making sure that the employees get the professional development that they need, not that you decide that they need because there's some high-profile scandal and we need to bring some professional development. Make sure that they all wear the same uniforms because you know better than I do,
Mix
right?
and match, right.
Whatever I can pull out of my closet today. This is how people learn respect for profession. The way you look, the way you project yourself, the way you talk about your job. Yeah, it starts with how you respect yourself. How fearful you are of losing this job. Not just because you're fearful of losing a job, but because you know that you'll never get a better job.
Right.
Because this is a
You
job
really want
that
it.
you really want it. And people respect it. This is how you build police-community relations. Not through creating NCOs, through creation of respect for the profession. And respect for the profession doesn't come just from the conversation you have with a number of community members or...
They're not going to do that.
organizers.
It's going to cost too much.
It does not going to cost anything.
Well,
Ed.
but when you talk to the people that are responsible, that'll be the answer. It's forward thinking. It's out of the box thinking.
Yeah.
You're talking cultural changes.
It's not so much out of the box because, again, going back to my crystal ball, I have a crystal ball, but I also have some things that I've seen. Charlotte, North Carolina, 1997 through 1999, 2 years, going back and forth as part of my research on police integrity. Charlotte is a banking city. Bank of America at headquarters, Ericsson, the phone company. They got money from banks, I don't know. You walk into their headquarters, you think you walked into a museum. I mean, murals, high-end, technology. Back then, 1997,
Sure, yeah.
every car had, had cameras. Every car had a computer. 1997, here everybody was still a typewriter, and whereas the carbon paper, right, until a few years ago. I've seen these things in United States of America, not in Norway, not in Finland, where I always like to look at, but here, Charlotte, North Carolina. This was a department. This was the department of 22nd century, not 21st century, 22nd. Why? Because the chiefs were forward thinking. They knew that they can create an environment that fits the environment in which they operate. We operate in one of the richest cities on earth, right? But our department, NYPD, doesn't look like a department in the richest city.
No, it's, I mean, for everything that we do and for all the prestige that it holds, we're missing a lot that should be out there. And, you said it a few times. We don't take care of the people that are on this job, and that's what's missing.
But, together with the idea of community-oriented policing that was born in the early 80s, the idea of TQM came, total quality management, which, how do you become an organization that looks at the people as customers and we serve. Well, this whole idea of serve and protect goes back to the 1980s. Before there was no such concept of serve and protect the public.
Right.
Serve and protect the politician, not the public. Okay, but TQM, the total quality management, emphasizes the customer approach, but also towards internal customers, meaning the employees of the organization. You cannot take a corporate philosophy and implement it in a public service by taking just a piece of it. It works when you implement it fully.
Right.
If you don't start with your employees, don't expect these employees to treat the community in the right way.
A lot of it is, I always feel the NYPD needs to change the whole hierarchy, bring in all new forward-thinking people that are outside the box and implement new policies that will impact the younger cops coming up.
Absolutely, and there were, and you and I talked about this, and there were times when it was done. During Commissioner Kelly, when after 9/11 he created the new bureau, the Counterterrorism Bureau and the Intel. Right. He brought Commissioner Libuti, he brought David Cohen, he brought a person from the Marines, he brought a person from CIA. There were people of knowledge. Not brothers, not sisters, not spouses, not cousins, not somebody picked up a phone, hired him or her. People who had legitimate, objective experience and track record of success. Because you can be an employee of an organization, but you don't have a track record of success, right? So I don't need you just because you were part of the Marines. Show me what kind of leader you were in the Marines. I don't need you because you were part of the CIA. Show me what you have done for the CIA. Right. This is how you create an organization that will generate respect.
Hopefully someone out there is listening and gets ambitious to make the changes, because the truth of it is the working cop, the men and women in the NYPD that are in the street, they're the ones that are being shortchanged. And ultimately, it's the public that gets shortchanged. So express your concerns. Thanks for watching. Maki, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.